Hey guys, welcome to the Alliance. I have today a special guest, Steve Patterson. Uh, Folks, if you're big into podcasts, you got to check out his podcast. He kind of just talks about everything from religion to, uh, if the first episode you listen to, you're not feeling it, listen to another one. You'll get into something that you're interested in, I'm sure. But Steve, thanks for coming on. I listened to one of your podcasts from 4 years ago, like right at 4 years ago, and it's only a 20-minute episode. You guys got to go find it. It's episode 104, and I don't know. I just listened to it. I've listened to it multiple times. It's fascinating. It's Steve. You posit that we are living in a dark age, or at least 4 years ago we were, right? And I don't know. I have the notes. I have the 6 points of why you think that, but uh, that's why I brought you on to talk about it.
So your the connection broke up a little bit there, but I'm gonna guess what you asked. I think you said you listened to the Our Present Dark Age podcast, which is a narration of an article that I wrote several years ago, and you wanted me to give the overview. I think that's what you were asking, but it broke up a bit.
Yeah. If we can run through the 6 points. And by the way,
Yeah.
so disappointed. Every time I check your feed, I'm like, is he going to talk about this some more? And you haven't. So
Yeah.
but yeah,
So
go ahead and give
let me give you the explanation for the article and then where things stand in terms of present research on it. So the big picture is that it's very common for people to realize that in specific domains, our paradigms seem to be flawed. So, for example, in the domain of nutrition, there's a whole movement of people out there that have been around for 20 years online that are saying, maybe the food pyramid was kind of crap, and maybe the so-called nutrition experts really know what they were talking about, and they're investigating alternative theories of nutrition, and that's great, and that's exciting. But there are also other groups who are listening to the paradigms that we've inherited about particular medical procedures, whether or not they're a good idea, a bad idea, or the science behind them. And they go, maybe I think the experts are incorrect here. And so they discover that, if they go down the rabbit hole, that the paradigms that the let's say the mainstream world is operating under are not so good. And so I also figured this out, and my background was a little bit more on the political theory and economic side. And I realized that, like, Keynesian economics is deeply flawed, among other things. And I then recognize there's a general pattern. Actually, it's not when discovering one of these paradigmatic mistakes, it's not just a one-off a unique situation, which is very tempting to think. It's actually the norm. The general pattern appears to be across effectively every domain that I've been able to research in some detail, that we have inherited paradigms from the 20th century that are flawed. And the paradigms are very frequently not even a very high intellectual caliber, and they weren't even established for their intellectual quality, but rather these paradigms are generally established for social or psychological or political reasons. And paradigms can be established, that they emerge through group dynamics. So the idea, for example, if a prestigious individual, prestigious group of people think that their pet theory in physics is true, if that gets established, well, it suddenly becomes very difficult to challenge those paradigms. So once they're established, even if this is a century ago, you can inherit those ideas that become axiomatic, essentially, even though they're maybe not grounded with much depth to them. So that's kind of the big picture. And then I'm in that article I wrote, it's called Our Present Dark Age, Part 1, actually. I was intending on writing a long series. It gives this big picture argument, and then I try to explain a little bit in more detail the types of errors that present intellectuals are making. Like the biggest, most important one is that they profoundly oversimplify the
Hmm.
world. The world is mind-bogglingly complex, and in domain after domain, they have like simplistic models, simplistic abstractions that, in hindsight, I think are going to look very foolish and very childish. But the oversimplification seems to be a universal problem in every domain. Um, and then the idea was, when I wrote this, I wrote this I think in 2021. And I don't remember when I did the narration of it. And I had already been thinking along these lines for some time. And I thought, okay, I got to put this. This was during COVID, some of the COVID madness. I thought, okay, I got to get these ideas out there now, nobody else beats me to the punch, because I think I'm putting my stake down in ground that in hindsight is going to look correct, and I'm going to be vindicated here. And the idea was, instead of even just arguing at this level, this very abstract level of saying we've been living in a dark age, take my word for it, what I was planning on doing was making a article series that would be a topic after topic after topic, doing, a somewhat of a deep dive, maybe 3,000 words or so, explaining here is the idea that we have inherited, some crazy medical practice, or some idea, there are some ideas in statistics and even in mathematics that are very dopey. Explain why they're wrong, very clearly why they're wrong, why the dissident intellectuals, generally superior theories, were excluded from the conversation. Explain all of that, and then just have like a list of like 60 examples, one after the other, and say, listen, one explanation for this is that there's a general pattern here. I don't have to like make a difficult theoretical argument for the existence of a dark age. The idea was, I'm going to show you, I'm going to write 60 things, and then an explanation for synthesizing these 60 things is that, in fact, we've been in a dark age it looks like it stretches back a little bit more than a century. But
Really?
yeah, that didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because I realized, as I continued going down this path, that the project is too big for my one person. So I've been working on creating a new research institute. It's called the Natural Philosophy Institute, and I'm in the process of slowly unfolding it right now. Which is I'm going to try to bring other people in to sort of accomplish the same vision, but instead of 60 articles on a blog, it's going to be like an institute, and I'm going to get professional researchers involved to do this the
Mhm.
right way. So I'm in the process of doing that right now. That's where things stand at the moment.
Uh, So I'll just, and I don't know exactly how to do this. I've never done this on my show really, but certainly not with a guest. But no, I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong about one part of it, because you argue that we're coming out of the dark age,
That we could be.
and I don't see any. Huh?
That we could be. Yeah, I think
I
we
mean,
we definitely could be.
oh, okay, could be. Yeah, I think that I have no reason to think that. How could you? How can you know you're halfway through an uncharted forest,
Hmm.
uh, or halfway through an uncharted forest? I mean, we don't know. I love the idea of the internet. Uh, you know, as a escape valve for us, uh, but the internet isn't going to change academia. Uh, it's not going to cause these people with their own vested interest to rethink how they structure universities. Um, your point six, that people just don't want to be wrong, right? They don't want to admit that they're wrong. I tell people all the time, I'm like, man, most individuals would rather be starting in the middle of Yankee Stadium than to have to admit they're wrong on anything. That's people's greatest fear. Uh, I mean, like I say, so entering the Renaissance, um,
Having a bad connection there.
the establishment, the universities, the dark age for them is going to continue, um, and it's permeated down into society to where, I mean,
So
I
let
don't know,
me, sorry
for
to
rambling.
interrupt you. Let me jump in here. There was a
Go ahead.
big there's a big connection error, so I'm going to try to infer again what you were saying and then respond. So I infer from your position you don't think that we're going to be leaving the dark age because you don't think that these vested institutions are going to correct course. Is that fair? You, okay. Sorry, it's just it's in the bad bad internet connection. So I think I heard a yes. So let me respond to that idea.
Okay.
So the claim is not that there's going to be a general awakening in the immediate future per se. I don't think I don't think most of the institutions are going to correct course. I think that would be impossible. But I also don't think that's relevant. So the way that I think the world works is as a very, very, very small number of people that matter in terms of setting the agenda, setting the intellectual climate, setting the political climate, setting up the paradigms that we live under. This is a pattern that I've seen historically speaking, and everybody else really falls in line given a particular amount of time. And that's also, there's pros and cons of that being the case. I think that's the world we live in. And so the reason I'm optimistic is because the internet has allowed those individuals a a freedom of mind, a space to explore ideas and connect with one another that they literally have never had in history. And I see evidence that all over the place, people are talking, they're having these types of conversations like, oh, maybe we've been in a dark age. Maybe our institutions are corrupt. Maybe things are really, 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 really bad. So the fact that people are talking this way, I know there are many that I've heard others also say, yeah, I think we're going into a dark age or it's going to get worse. I'm thinking, well, it is evidence that something is profoundly correcting, that these conversations are being had out in the open. Where is 10 years ago, I think the only people talking like this were considered crazies. They were absolutely on the fringe. But now you already have like new establishments, you have new intellectual networks, new research networks that are already that are built out and are actively being built that I don't think are going to go anywhere. So if there's in my mind, the biggest risk that we have is that they're going to try to shut down the internet or they're going to try to stop freedom of speech to preserve the old order. I think that's a real threat. I think that's going to be especially difficult in the future when dissident researchers start talking about alternative health ideas because the government and the authorities will allow you to say kooky things on the internet so long as it doesn't, affect public health. But the public health authorities I can easily imagine, just like they did during COVID, I can easily imagine them saying, sorry, you can't actually say these things. This criticism, we're going to let you criticize the establishment so far, but when you start talking about these crazy alternative health things, we got to protect people from these kooky ideas. And so we're going to step in and shut down discussions and shut down organizations or imprison people. I could very easily imagine that future. And if we go into that future, then yeah, I would be more pessimistic. But outside of that, if that doesn't happen, then I think the trajectory is very, very bright, getting brighter all the time, in my opinion, despite the utter insanity of the general public and the political climate. I just see an awakening that's happening right now that I've never seen anything like it before, not even close.
I mean, yeah, there's the what I think was so bad about the previous dark age that we heard about was that if you were a free mind, you were isolated, you were shut down, you couldn't talk to anybody else, right? You couldn't ask the questions that you weren't supposed to ask. And the internet has allowed us to connect to each other and to do that. But the the powers that be, uh, they want to continue to be the powers that will be, and they're they're not going to change. There's also the uh, just the
Yeah,
culture.
but
I mean,
who cares about
you
the
know,
powers that be, and who cares
it,
about the culture? So imagine then we're just restricting the question to the remnant. We're going to say, are we going into a world in which some significant sliver of individuals are going to have their own alternative institutions, their own alternative ideas, who are going to be very aware of the kind of decay that has happened over the last century and are connected with one another and like living how they want to live?
Yes,
If
yes,
that's the case, then I think that's
I
kind of the vision.
100.
That's what I mean by getting out of a dark age. That I do think that's in our future at present. I'm not guaranteed. I'm not guaranteeing that's going to happen, but I do think we're on that trajectory right now.
No, I mean that's like I absolutely agree with that. That's true, and you bring up a lot of great points. Like I, that's what I think. I think it's going to be side by side where there's
Yeah,
the Renaissance with your institution and Scott Horton and the Mises Institute, and a lot of great things. On the
Natural
other
Philosophy
hand,
Institute.
uh, yeah, the Natural Philosophy Institute
Yeah,
sounds really exciting. Um, but as far as the universities, government's never going to stop funding the
yeah.
universities and guiding, quote unquote, guiding, or I guess guiding the quote unquote science. Um, on that side, I feel completely hopeless. I don't think we're going to have a general broad
Yeah,
renaissance
I
where
don't. I think
people.
eventually we might go there, but if you're using the term Renaissance, that's the. It sounds like you're conceiving of it in a similar way that I'm thinking of getting out of the dark age. And I don't really care.
Right.
I am so pessimistic about the existing establishment and political structure and power structure. I don't really think that they matter so much, and they matter in some practical sense, but in terms of like where, for example, so I have a background in Bitcoin, right? I've been involved in Bitcoin for a long time, written a couple of books about it. I saw firsthand how a small group of people, small sliver of people, established a intellectual and cultural climate in Bitcoin that completely changed it in a period over a period of only
Mhm.
several years. And now the 99% of people who are aware of crypto or invested or interested in it, they're fish swimming in water and they don't realize that they're swimming in water, because though there was a bunch of decisions made by only really a handful of people that shaped the course of history with regards to crypto. And and that goes all the way up to the top. So when the president and the people around the president talk about crypto, they have no idea what they're talking about at all. And the people, they're influenced by a subset of people around them who know a little tiny bit. But then as you go, sort of, okay, who actually knows what they're talking about in crypto? Well, there was like a handful of people, a decade ago plus, that set the ideas and the paradigms that everybody else is living under. So if we're going into a renaissance, even if it's alongside mass hysteria and ignorance, then I want to say, well, it could be that the new climate 50 years from now, then 100 years from now, is going to be established now at present or in the next 10 or 20 years by this sliver of people that are connecting online that have never been able to do so before. We're using technology in a way that is historically unprecedented. So that looks like that looks like the most realistic, optimistic case I can imagine. And it doesn't really, whether or not it affects the the mass culture or the mass political financial establishment, that's not really something I'm tracking right now.
So it's not the end of the end; it's the beginning of the end for the dark age.
No, we'll put it this way:
I think that's a.
even if it were the case that we had this new climate, even if we won, even if the Renaissance people won, I don't think that will happen per se, because I don't think that's how history plays out. But let's imagine the best case scenario: you get the Renaissance, you get the people who care about the truth. They're in positions of power. They influence positions of power. I still think in such a world, you're going to have mass hysteria, mass ignorance everywhere. So I just think that's a feature
Mhm.
of how
Oh,
humanity operates. That the average individual is deferring to authorities that ultimately don't know what they're
mhm.
talking about, and then somewhere up the hierarchy, somebody knows what they're talking about, but it generally doesn't filter down. So I guess I've just sort of ruled out the possibility of any type of you know paradise scenario where like the average person is aware of things that I think are important.
So my internet connection holds up. I don't know what the deal is, guys. I'm so sorry. Um, if that holds up, then I think I am more white pilled than you are. Here's the idea. Like I'm kind of blue collar. I'm a cowboy and run cattle and stuff. Uh, the idea is that the common person has no faith in academia or university, uh, because I mean, look at their track record. Uh, the Economist
Yeah.
is always wrong, not the Austrian, but but we don't know about the Austrians. So, well, I should have used them last. Like, look at global warming. Okay, that's bunk. They've been talking about climate change and everything for years and years. Uh, the COVID deal, the science on the vaccine. That's all a bunch of garbage. Uh, even into our energy sector, they're talking about wind and solar, and it's just not panning out. And I come along with Austrian economics, and nobody wants to hear anything I have to say because the experts are idiots. Uh, and so if the intellectuals can uh, get their shit together, then I think we can go back to an era, because I feel like there was a time where the common man, maybe not revered but at least respected the intellectual class, when the intellectuals were
When
honest
do you
and
think that
actually knew what
was?
they were. I don't. That's a great question. I don't know. The turn of the uh, early America, the early 1800s, late 7th. That's that's what I feel from reading Jefferson and Thomas Paine, but maybe they were just intellectuals. Um, was
Yeah,
Jefferson an
I
intellect?
that's the I'm oh, I definitely Jefferson was an intellectual. A lot of those, the founding fathers were almost all elite. They were all like, the type when we think of like a European aristocrat, it's sort of like the American version of aristocrats over here. So I look, I I think if I would imagine, I'm just going to guess that a lot of the people in your social circle are already in agreement about the failures of academia. They are already in agreement about global warming
Yeah,
being a scam, right? Sorry, your internet connection died again.
I'm here.
Okay, so
I'm
is
here.
that yeah? That is a yes. That yeah, people around you are generally in agreement on some of these things. A lot of these things. Okay,
Yeah,
yes, I
every
could at least
last
see the.
one.
I couldn't hear.
It goes all the way down to. I'm sorry. It goes all the way down into the science on gun violence. I mean, the whole thing. There's
yeah.
so much. Nobody wants to listen to any of these people on anything.
Well, when you say no, I'm sorry. So let's try to make sure that the connection is working because I would like to have a little back and forth on that. So when you say nobody wants to have a conversation about the science of gun violence because when you've done a deep dive and you know that it's bunk that they're playing with statistics, which they are for political reasons. But do the people around you? So when you say nobody wants to do that, are you referring to the people around you, or are you referring to what you perceive as the sort of the intellectual commentariat class?
I think that the people around me don't want to hear from university academics
To their
because
credit,
they, yeah, the institutions and the academics have discredited themselves to the extent,
yes,
like I say, when I hand somebody a book written by Ludwig von Mises and talk about
yeah,
his pedigree as an academic, man, they don't want to even hear that. They've gotten so
yeah, yeah.
bitter
I see, I see.
that they won't touch it.
So Le- so let me see if I can rephrase what you're saying and see if this is fair. That your complaint is that the intellectual class has failed so spectacularly. They're so profoundly incompetent and corrupt and dangerous. Their ideas are so stupid that it's tarnished the great thinkers and the great minds that we have that people should be interested in, like Ludwig von Mises, for example.
Right. We have created the university, quite contrary to its mission to spread truth. It has caused people to be anti-intellectual,
Yeah,
um, and just poo-poo the entire realm of science. Like they don't want to know economics. What they want to do is listen to Trump talk common sense about trade reforms. And
yeah.
it's like,
So
no,
we're
no,
we're on the
there
same
there
page.
is real science.
Yeah, no, this is actually very relevant to the world that I'm in right now. So I'm in complete agreement that it's so funny because there's a very perverse dynamic where the intellectual elite are looking down on the common man for being anti-intellectuals. And yet, it's the common man who has enough sense, who has enough connection to truth, has enough functioning brain where he can say, the intellectual elite in America and Europe are full of shit all the time. They're so utterly irrelevant. It's actually a burden to listen to them. So I'm better off not listening to them at all. And that is a tragedy. That is just
Right.
objectively a tragedy because it is possible to do valuable, important intellectual work. And so it is. I agree. It's a terrible consequence of the failures of the academy. And I do think, though, that this would make me even more encouraged. I'm more optimistic about the future. That let's not worry too much about the institutions right now. Maybe we can have new institutions that have some social credibility. Maybe we can take some of the ideas that we get from Mises and make them even more accessible. Although I think he's a pretty good writer. And I have also seen the pattern that among the common men, there's an openness, I think, to recognizing the value of um, academic research, even though it almost has to be, even to call it academic is sort of to taint it because the situation is so dire. But there's a space. I don't really know what to call it, but like I can easily envision a world in which there are alternative institutions which are outside of formal academia, getting money from the government, which are considered credible and which are producing high quality content. I know, for example, during COVID, there were some of these in between institutions like the FLCCC is a bunch of dissident academics that got together and said, well, these are the protocols that we're using independently that we've figured out that are working for us. And that was something that was very successful. Now, granted, they're not totally outside of the academy or totally outside of the mainstream. I think most of those people had credentials, but that's an example of like an alternative intellectual social structure where people were deferring to their authority and their expertise, and I think that probably helped people navigate the COVID situation. So I it's funny. You're saying the common man might be struggling with the anti-intellectualism because of the failures of academia, but I'm saying I want to say, yeah, but they're onto something, right? There's a reason for that,
Oh yeah,
and I could sort of I could sort of see the logic in that.
yeah. I'm not. I mean, I'm not mad at them. I'm mad at the
Yeah,
university.
yeah,
You know, after with that track record, how could you? How could you? Um, it. But as far as like the academics, I don't know when, and I don't know the Mises Institute. They do a good job. Uh, your first point was the complexity of the world. That
yeah,
and I read somewhere. I think it was Rothbard that said it, but to be a good economist, you have to be a historian. To be a good historian, you have to be an economist. That the
yeah, right.
world is connected, and you can't be this singular specialist. You have to be a polymath and uh, study all fields to because all the fields inform all the other fields. So what I'm trying to get at is that how do we influence people and show them that it's interconnected because we've been in this rut, like you say, for a long time
Yeah,
of specialization.
yeah. I mean, it's a difficult question. Yeah. So again, in trying to see through the clouds of the climate that we're in and the situation that we've inherited, I say we've been living in a dark age for a little bit more than a century, and part of the reason for that is when I'm tracking down the fundamental philosophical building blocks of different um, um, domains. A lot of them have their origins in the period of time between like 1870 and roughly 1920. So in physics, you have the establishment of the Copenhagen interpretation, you have general relativity that comes out. In mathematics, you have the development of non-Euclidean geometries and set theories, and so on. So in different domains, You have the new paradigms are established during that time period. But also during that time period, and importantly, was kind of the peak of the progressive era, the old school progressive era,
Mm-hmm.
and also the establishment of radically new institutions like in the U.S., for example, the Federal Reserve,
Yes.
established right during that time period. So I think part of cutting out the cancer is having to go all the way down to the roots if you can find them. And so I do think that there is a in the early 20th century progressive worldview, there was just clownish, clownish oversimplification of the world, where they thought we could have the managed society from the central experts that know the truth about economics or whatever, or health or medicine, and we could control society to, I don't know, create a utopia, something like that. That's also we got the emergence at the same time period. We get the emergence of communism.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also connected here. It's the same spirit, same
Mm-hmm.
arrogant spirit. So I do think if we want to cut out the cancer, I think we have to go back a long ways to see where not only the intellectual paradigms that we've inherited come from, but also the cultural paradigms. And one of them, unfortunately, when you're talking about complexity, is it's a very, very, very different philosophy on the world to say that we more or less understand how the world works versus we are profoundly confused about almost everything in the world. Like in biological systems, which are the most complex systems I know of, these systems are so complex, we literally don't know how complex they are. Like we're still discovering effectively new organs that are distributed in the body in ways we didn't understand. That we're discovering new categories of biological phenomena at present, which tells you that we're like profoundly ignorant in these domains. So if we could manage to regain some intellectual humility through
Right.
discovering the profound complexity of the world, then I think we would be on much firmer footing. And to your point, last thing I'll say on this is, as far as I can tell, the only way to do that is to try to be the polymath. And we need old school intellectuals, 19th century intellectuals, 18th century intellectuals tended to be more of the polymath type. You mentioned Jefferson. There's a bunch of great intellectuals in the 19th century that literally studied 20 different domains and made contributions in 15 of them. That was the way that they thought about how one would be educated, because these domains deeply interconnect with one another. So I also think uh, it's probably the types of individuals who are pursuing the polymath approach that are maybe those that are going to be on the forefront in teaching people about the profound complexity problem, because you could even have domain experts themselves who are massively oversimplifying the world because they're just completely ignorant of the ideas that come from domains that aren't even on the other side of the campus block, that are like literally next door. Like the economist and the political theorist don't even realize how some of their ideas invalidate the others because they're siloed off from one another.
And see, I bled my question into specialization because the underestimation of complexity and the specialization, they're literally two sides of the same coin. Is that on the one hand they don't see how they fit together, and then the specialization. Uh, what's crazy is that and I don't know much about medicine or biology, see, because I'm not the polymath that I would like to be. Um, but the idea is that uh, the heart surgeon or the heart doctor doesn't know jack about the nervous system. I'm sure he must, right? But
Right.
just work with the analogy, I guess, is that if you don't know about the nervous system, that's a problem. Like you specialize in the heart, but you should still know about the nervous system because it works together. And I guess maybe that's more of like
Yep.
an analogy for what we're dealing with, right? Um, I don't know. My thought
Yeah.
is like, hey, you should. I'm an economist and a historian, but I would like to know enough about other subjects so that when people are talking about it, I at least have a clue of what's going on. And it's frustrating to see
Right.
really intelligent people who are a specialist in one area, and you bring up, an economic question, they're like, I'll leave that to the economists. It's like,
Oh
no,
yeah, yeah.
that's anyway.
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah.
I completely agree with this, and part of the reason that's incredibly important is because, and economics is a great example of it. There are certain economic concepts that if you lack them, you can say, well, let's say you're going to end up saying very silly things about the world, like in the
Mhm.
domain of politics, for example. If you don't really grasp supply and demand, if you don't
Right.
grasp what prices do in an economy, like this unbelievably critically important function of the price mechanism. If you don't understand that, you're going to make blunders all the time when talking about politics because it comes up because people have opinions about how the state should manage the economy and what regulations should be, but if you don't understand this basic concept, there's the likelihood of this being like a sophisticated perspective is almost zero. But here's the problem. So this is the case. I discovered this the hard way. I discovered this actually. I got politically aware in the Ron Paul era, and Ron Paul was talking about economics, and he was saying such reasonable things. And I was like, oh, I have to dive into this. And then I realized after going down the economics rabbit hole, oh wow, this gives me a much deeper understanding of the world. That now when I listen to political discussion, I have you know a set of concepts that is invalidating a whole bunch of stuff that I'm hearing in politics. But it doesn't stop there, unfortunately, because that principle applies to uh, let's think about it as like an abstraction uh, pyramid or something. So you've got like political ideas here, and the political ideas are sort of implicitly presupposing a bunch of economic ideas, inescapably so. But the economic ideas are also
Right.
presupposing a bunch of other ideas. And I think this bottoms out in philosophy. So, for example, one of the rabbit holes
Sure.
I went down in economics was the methodology of economics. Okay, economics is really important for understanding the world. Yes, indeed it is. How do we discover economic knowledge? Do we read about it? Do we do experiments in the field? How do you learn about economics? Do you read some books? Which
True.
ones do you read from what perspectives? So I asked the question to demonstrate the point that actually there's some deeper questions here about methodology in economics, and in that domain, that's philosophy. When you're talking about methodology, you're talking about philosophy.
Okay.
Every domain out there is the same exact pattern. You've got sort of the superficial conclusions, and you've got assumptions and premises, and you've got methodological questions, and underpinning that you have philosophy. And when you play around in those waters for long enough, then you see the pattern I was describing earlier on steroids, which is you have the conceptual tools to then invalidate a whole bunch of claims that people are making in a whole bunch of different domains. You say, well, that's actually a logical fallacy, and actually you think you're over relying on the information that you're getting here, and you're not seeing alternative hypotheses. And yeah, that's the game I've been playing personally because I'm interested in trying to figure things out. But that's also like a very disorienting path to take because you just keep realizing you can invalidate other people's ideas, but you also end up invalidating your own. And like, I guess I didn't know what the heck I was talking about.
Right. So in there is epistemology. Is epistemology still part of philosophy?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Is okay. Okay. Good. Yeah. I got to have Robert Murphy on previously, and we talked about the a prioristic nature of economics. That
Yeah.
you you can't look back at history and learn something new about economics. You look back and you see what the theory proves out, or you see it proved out in real life of what the theory said. If I'm making sense, I don't know. He says it a lot better than I do.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you mentioned Bob Murphy. That is one of the domains he and I have spoken about. Actually, spoken a show on this topic on economic methodology because the position you're describing is a traditional one. One of the branches of the Austrians are the a priorists that think, as you said, you can't learn. Let's say you can't learn economic theory from history, something like that. But I disagree on this. I used to think the same
Oh,
thing, and now I think that's too strong a claim. I do think there's a role for a prioristic reasoning in economics, but I think people overstate it. I think we have to be a little bit more open to empirical inquiry in economics than that school of thought, the kind of Walter Block, Hans Hoppe, Rothbard strain. But yeah, if people are interested in that, that's a very important subject. I might be wrong, but Bob Murphy and I did talk about that on his show in particular.
maybe that's why he's giving me some pushback on it.
That could be. I don't know.
As I'm reading out of Human Action. I'm like, look, this is how it is,
Yeah.
right? Right, but Murphy is, and he didn't come out and ever say no, you got it all wrong, but he did give me some pushback on it. I'm like, well, wait a second, because my thing is that it has to be reasonable. You have to think through it logically, and I don't have a problem with demonstrating the point um, in history, but economics has to be reasonable. Every science has to be reasonable, right?
Yeah. Well, I
Can't
agree with
have
that. Yeah.
physics that wouldn't work. Can physics be irrational?
Well, that's a whole rabbit hole because actually we mentioned briefly before recording this Copenhagen interpretation paradigm was established early 20th century, and you could absolutely say that the spirit of the Copenhagen interpretation is irrational. I'm not even sure that the founders of that school of thought would disagree with it. That in fact, there's a quote from Niels Bohr, who's one of the founders of, you could call him the father of the Copenhagen interpretation, saying saying somebody who he was responding to somebody criticizing his theory, and he said, "No, no, no, you're not thinking. You're just being logical." So he thought that was a retort. He thought,
Uh,
"Oh well, my theory is sort of beyond that." And so yeah, there actually is there's multiple schools of thought in different domains which you could say are irrationalist. That's part of one of the things. Actually, part of the reason I got into physics and some of the philosophy of math stuff is because I was making the argument you were making. Let's be reasonable, guy. Let's be logical. Like at the very least, let's not contradict ourselves. Can we agree on that? And I would hear these crazy arguments from people saying, well, in certain circumstances, you can contradict yourself. Like, look, Schrodinger's cat in quantum mechanics. Like, what is going on?
right.
So I had to do the deep dive. What is this about? Or and even in mathematics. In fact, true story. On the topic of logic, this is an aside, but it's an interesting story. I'm sure you'll appreciate about the incompetence of academia. So, early in the Patterson and Pursuit podcast, I did an interview with a philosopher. I think he was a philosopher of mathematics at Columbia University. It's supposed to be a prestigious place, right? And we were talking about the subject of logic. Are there any exceptions to the laws of logic? And he told me, I forget what episode it was. He told me, this is a recorded conversation I had, that, well, there could be some examples of exceptions to the law of identity, which says that things are the way that they are. A is A. And I said, well, can you give me some examples? And he gave me two. The first, he said, was the Pope. And he said, for example, is the Pope married? Well, the Pope is married and unmarried at the same time. He's married to the church, but he's an unmarried man. And he gave that as an example of maybe that's a logical contradiction. Now, for your audience that's listening and thinking through this carefully, that's obviously not a logical contradiction because when you're using the word married, but you're using it in two different contexts. So a contradiction would be he's married to the church and he's not married to the church at the same time. Or he's married to a woman and he's not married to the woman. That's incoherent. That doesn't make any sense. So that's like a basic logical flub that I got recorded from this gentleman who I actually really liked. I hope he's not listening because I really liked. Sorry, but that was very foolish. The other example that he gave me, which I was not surprised at the time, but it's ironic in hindsight. He said, for example, in mathematics, there's this concept of an infinite set of numbers. And he was saying this is a logical contradiction because what a set of numbers implies is some kind of bounded group of a set. But to say that it's infinite implies it's not bounded. And he was giving, and I actually think that's a good example of logical contradiction, ironically. But that reflects on there being deep flaws at the foundations of mathematics established about a century ago. It doesn't reflect on there being some exception to the law of logic. So that's actually the reason I went down some of these rabbit holes, is to try to see why are people so crazy that they're literally making the case for irrationalism in domains that are supposed to be the most rigorous. And that's what I found.
Okay. All right. Hang on. Give me a minute. Uh, Yeah, okay, but what's really true? Uh, when you come down to not what physicists say or what they write, but the like reality, the truth of the physical world that the Lord made, and we can get into that if you want. Uh, but and I think it's neat. When I first started listening to you, I think you were just an atheist, right?
Nope, nope.
Is that? Oh, okay.
No, no.
Maybe.
Ne I was an atheist for about 30 seconds in my probably less than 30 seconds. It's a funny story, we can talk about it, here, but, yeah,
Okay.
I've only and that was in, that would have been 2011, I think. So,
Okay, but nevertheless, you've made some moves in your theological thinking. But
definitely.
my idea is like I want truth. That's the thing. And that's at the essence of Christianity. Jesus is the truth. This is my thought. But when it comes down to the actual physics, um, that doesn't that doesn't jive what with the Copenhagen thing. That's not real. They got it wrong.
No,
So
it's not. Well, so let me say specifically, let me try to explain, that position just because for the sticklers listening. So, um,
okay.
there's different ways of saying what the Copenhagen interpretation is, but let's say for purposes here, they're going to say that there is no such thing as reality, a physical reality being in some state outside of our measuring it. So it's actually our measuring of it that brings reality into a defined state. Now, some people have taken this and they've taken this as an affirmation of logical contradiction. They'll say, for example, the Schrodinger's cat is alive and dead at the same time. That would be a logical contradiction. But that's what they're saying. I'm also going to I'm going to say that is a irrational, position. So for example, if you were to ask, just the most basic example, what is the temperature in this sealed off box? They would say, well, if we aren't measuring it, it's not the case that there is a temperature. There is no such state. It's in a probability state. It's in some probability cloud. It could be this way. It could be that way. And then on the act of measuring it turns it into a divine state. So that's crazy. And the other crazy part is that you don't need to go there. There's like 100 different directions you can go to avoid that conclusion, but that's where they swerve, right? It's like there's this open highway in terms of possible interpretations of physics, and there's like 70 lanes in front of you. And in one of the lanes, there's a really big like telephone pole. And they just, academics 100 years ago, they just went, they took great care to swerve straight into the telephone pole and crash into it and cause a terrible disaster when there were 69 lanes they could have chosen, but they had to do the one that didn't make any sense.
So no, I mean like if I have a calf born, or when I have a calf born and it's way off, far away, I can see the calf, but I don't know if it's a bull calf or a heifer. You know, then my kids will ask, they ask, and I'm like, well, it's both and neither until we lift up its tail,
So
right? It's
yeah,
it's ridiculous. It's like
yeah
this is
that's
nonsense.
yes, right, that's right. In fact, so have you I'm just curious, have you heard of this idea of Schrodinger's cat? Have you heard that term?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay,
right, yeah.
for the audience, this will be funny. Just to illustrate your point, right? So there's this thought experiment, which is that there's a cat, and it's inside of a box, and inside the box there's a flask of some toxic chemical, and there's a radioactive particle in the box, and if the particle decays, then it breaks the flask and the cat dies. But if it doesn't decay, then the flask is not broken and the cat stays alive. And so in this thought experiment, we ask at any given time, is the cat alive or dead? And the Copenhagen interpretation, so the modern take is to say, oh, the cat is alive and dead at the same time until you open the box, and then it takes a state.
Mhm.
The more careful way to put it would be, well, it's in a superposition of being alive and dead at the same time. And then, You ask, what is a superposition? Well, that gets very, very murky indeed. Anyway, here's the funny point. When people are making irrationalist arguments, they often will appeal to the Schrodinger's cat. They'll say, "Oh, well, look, reality can be kind of blurry and contradictory and fuzzy in two different states at the same time because look, Schrodinger's cat." They don't realize that that argument comes from the physicist Schrodinger, who was literally came up with that thought experiment to demonstrate the absurdity of the Copenhagen interpretation. He was saying that's an argumentum ad absurdum. So one of the most prominent physicists of the 20th century said, your idea is so stupid that it results in this paradox. And then 60 years later, people are appealing to the paradox to try to say that reality is fuzzy because look at this thought experiment. So what an incredible situation. You can't make that up, right?
It's wow. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that he was poking fun at
Yes.
the Copenhagen. Wow. Okay. Well, that makes me like Schrodinger a lot more now.
Yeah,
Now he
for
makes
sure.
sense. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, he was a great mind. Yes.
Um, yeah, and then okay, so like I'll skip. I don't know what you're looking like on time, dude.
I got about. I probably should leave in about 6 minutes. Give myself a couple of minutes here.
Okay, real quick, just hit on like I guess like point six was human biology and psychology is not uh, conducive to critical thinking, and
Yeah.
you know in terms of the Dark Ages, that one is a constant. That one's always been. That's how we've always been.
Yeah.
Um, but it seems like that's one of the biggest ones, and it seems like that's the one that could also what possibly be the easiest to overcome. You've overcome it. Overcome it. Um, how do we get people to uh, think critically?
Yeah, I'd be careful to say we've overcome it. I think it can be managed. I'm not sure it can be totally overcome. I'm not really. So there's an interesting question here, right? When people are profoundly confused in their philosophy, does that come from intellectual confusion? Are they confused about the basics of epistemology or something, or does that come from psychological traits or even biological traits? Like if somebody is deeply physically unwell or mentally unwell, I think that ends up being often a truer explanation for the confusion than mere philosophical confusion. So I tend to think that one, when I'm having conversations with different people, I feel like the sweet zone of let's say where the errors are coming from is in the psychological world. I just think people are very, very, very insecure, and they're not generally trying to figure out the truth. That's something that you do when you have other psychological or biological things sorted out. So my guess is like if you really want to help people think critically, or you want society more generally to be thinking more critically, I think we have to figure out a psychological problem, which is incredibly difficult and maybe an impassable task. But I wouldn't even look at the philosophical first. I think, and I've had so many conversations with individuals over the past 20 years who I thought we were talking about ideas, and within a fairly short period of time, you can figure out, oh, that's not what this is about at all. It's like this is you don't want to think about these ideas because they're destabilizing, or you think they are going to reflect poorly on you, or you don't like the social dynamics, or you chafe at the idea of the social hierarchy that comes from this set of ideas, or you've been conditioned that if you think these thoughts, you're going to hell or something. So I don't even think it's at the intellectual level. I think it's psychological and perhaps biological underneath that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, uh, look, I've gotten myself into the Republican Party here in Oklahoma, and you know, you can't say that Trump is covering up the Epstein files.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
there's a plan. He has a plan. You just have to trust in Trump.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that cognitive dissonance that, you know, I see no way out of it. Um, and
Yeah. So
that's
let me ask you, what's going on there in your analysis? It's not really intellectual confusion, right? When you say
oh
Trump's, yeah, so like what are they doing? When people say, yeah, you got to trust Trump on this one, what do you actually think is going on there?
man, idolatry.
Okay,
That's idolatry.
that's a pretty good take.
It's that
So you're
it's
saying Trump being the idol?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
there's there's for sure the Trump derangement syndrome on the left, but the right, especially since he got shot last year, we've had the emergence of the Trump idol complex, and it's just
Yeah.
the inverse of derangement syndrome. Is that
Yeah.
he has it under control, and they'll even tie in Christian doctrine into it. Is that the Lord has His hand on Trump, and that Trump
Yeah.
is going to do the right thing, and it's like, I don't know. Like, is there a chance possibly that there's something to it? Maybe. Um, I mean, you can't believe that. It's like it being sunny and 100 degrees, and you're calling on rain. You know what? Maybe it could happen.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not real. It's
Well,
not
look,
real.
I agree with that answer. I think that's perhaps at the correct level of depth that I do think you could explain that as idolatry. And then, of course, the question is, well, if you want to fix that, how do you fix the an idolatrous problem? And suddenly now we're in the domain of people need Jesus. Ultimately, we're just going to skip all the other stuff. We're going to say people need Jesus, and then maybe that solves the fundamentals, and you can sort of build up layer by layer from there. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that conclusion. I think I think
All
that
right.
that's maybe right.
Yeah. I mean, you got to get running. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. Plug your website, Twitter, and
Yep.
so forth.
So people can find me at, I have a personal website, steve-patterson.com, that has some links to some of my personal writing. I think it's got a link to my YouTube channel. And then if they're interested in this research institute, it's called the Natural Philosophy Institute. And in very early stages now, but you can connect. We have something called the NatFi Network, which we're trying to build out a network of people here, a paid membership network for people to connect with one another. And that's natphi.org.
Okay. All right, great. Are you on Twitter? Did you say that
I
one?
am. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Steve in Pursuit. Yep.
Even Pursuit. All right.
Yep.
Hey, thanks a lot again for coming on.
Yep.
We'll see you next time, everybody.
All right. My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.